Mikdash moment. So today we're going to talk about the Aron HaKodesh, the Holy Ark, which stood in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, in the Holy of Holies. But more specifically, we are going to talk about the Keruvim. The Keruvim were the two cherub angels which sat on top of the Kaporos. The Kaporos was a solid gold lid on top of the Aron, and on top of that, beaten out of the solid block of gold of the Kaporos, were two Keruvim. The Torah tells us about the construction of the Aron at the beginning of Parshas Terumah. Of course, the Aron is the holiest of all of the vessels in the temple. It is the place from which Hashem's Shechina, Hashem's presence, was manifest in the Beis HaMikdash and from there to the world. And therefore, it is the most primary and the first to be discussed in detail. So the Torah tells us about the Aron itself, which perhaps we'll discuss at another time. It was constructed as a box out of wood plated in gold. And then they were commanded to make a kaporos zahav tahor, a covering, a lid for the Aron out of pure gold. V'asisa shnayim kruvim zahav, and they should make upon this kaporos two golden cherubs. Miksha ta'asa oisam, they should be beaten from the gold. Mishnei ktsois kaporos, from the two sides, from the two ends of the kaporos. V'asa kruv echad mikatzim, is there you should make one kruv on one side of the kaporos, and on the other side an additional kruv. And then it says, V'hayu hakruvim parsei knafayim l'mayla, that the kruvim had their wings spread upwards, hovering over the Aron itself. And it says, Ufanehem ish el achiv, their faces were one facing the other. So what were these keruvim? What did they represent on a deeper level? We know that everything has its purpose, everything has its function, everything has very specific reason of why it was included in the Mishkan. So I'd like to share with you an idea that was taught by our sages. Our sages teach in the Gemara in Bava Basra, Daf Tzadik Tes Amud Aleph, that says as follows. One verse says, Upneim ish elachit. That is the pasuk that we just quoted, that the faces of the Keruvim were one facing the other. But another pasuk says, Ufanehem labayis, that their faces were towards the bayis, towards the walls of the house, i.e. they are facing away from one another. So how do we resolve this contradiction? Were the Keruvim facing one another or were they facing away? So the Gemara tells us, Kan bizman Yisrael oisin retzoyne shamakim, Kan bizman she'ein Yisrael oisin retzoyne shamakim. That when the Jewish people are doing the will of Hashem, when the Jewish people are serving Hashem as they are supposed to be, then the two Keruvim faced one another. But when the Jewish people were not doing the will of Hashem, were not living as they should, they rebelled against Hashem, and then the two Keruvim turned away. So the two Keruvim actually represent the relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people, like two friends facing one another. Or it says, Ufneim ish el achiv, it describes the Keruvim as brothers, two brothers facing one another. So when the Jewish people are doing what we are supposed to be doing, then we are turned towards Hashem, we are facing Hashem, and Hashem responds by facing towards us with favor and with blessing. However, when we turn our faces away, then, so to speak, Hashem turns his face away from us, and the two Keruvim are facing the walls and not facing one another. Now, the Gemara tells us in Masechta Yuma that when the Jewish people would be Oila L'Regel, on the three pilgrimage festivals, when the Jewish people would ascend from everywhere in Eretz Yisrael to the holy city of Yerushalayim, they would come, they would gather at the Beis HaMikdash, and the Gemara tells us over there that they would lift up the paroiches, the curtain, which blocked, which separated between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy and the Holy of Holies. They would roll up this curtain, and they would show the Keruvim to the Jewish people. And when they showed the Keruvim to the Jewish people, the Keruvim were intertwined. They were embracing one another. And they would say, presumably this is referring to the Kohanim, they would say to the Jewish people, Ru'u chibatchem lifnei hamokim. You should see how beloved you are to Hashem. And it is kechibas zachar unekeva, like the love of a man to a woman, the love of a husband and a wife. And that is represented by the idea of the Keruvim embracing one another. And the deep love, obviously, that exists between husband and wife. So too, they were showing the Jewish people that this is how much Hashem loves you. He loves you passionately, like a man loves a woman. Now, before we go on and explain the continuation of the Gemara, which discusses what happened at the time of the Churban, which happened at the time of the destruction of the temple, we'd like to just share a couple of insights as to what was the shape of these Keruvim themselves. So obviously the Keruvim they were angels, they had wings, but what was their face? It says, Ufanehem ish el achiv. Their faces were one to the other. So what was the face of the Keruvim? So we just learned in the Gemara in Masechta Yuma that it was like a man and a woman. Indeed, this is the opinion of the Zohar. The Zohar says that one of the Keruvim was in the form of a man and the other was in the form of a woman. And therefore it represents one level of love, one form of love, and that is the love between husband and wife, between two spouses, which is a love which is very passionate, it's very fiery, depicting one side of our relationship with Hashem. According to the Gemara elsewhere, and indeed the Mefarshim explain, that the Keruvim both of them had the faces of a man, of a human being. However, one was ape ravri, one was a large face, i.e. the face of an adult, and the other is ape zutri, the small face of a young child. So this brings out a different dimension of Hashem's love for the Jewish people, unlike the analogy of the love between a husband and a wife, which is a passionate love, it's a fiery love. But this idea of the Keruvim having the face of an adult, of a parent, and the face of a young child, represents the love of a father to a child or a mother to her child. The love of a parent to a child is a very, very powerful love. It's an innate love, unlike the love of a husband and a wife, which is one which is developed over time. It's one which is based on attraction and based on chemistry, based on some form of connection. And therefore, like a fiery love, it will have its ups and downs. But the love of a parent to the child is v'nafshoy kashura b'nafshoy. One soul is bound up in the other. The child is an extension, is part of the parent, and the parent is within the child. And therefore, the love that a parent has to a child is not dependent on anything else. The love in a relationship between a husband and a wife, between a man and a woman, or between two friends for that matter, could be an ava hatuluya b'davar, could be a love that is based on something. It's a love that comes from an admiration or respect for the other's qualities, an attraction on one level, emotionally or physically, etc. But the love of a parent to a child is not based on any consideration whatsoever. It's not about the child's qualities. It's not about the child's achievements. It's not even about how the children behave. That the love of a parent to the child is absolutely constant. It's innate and essential and unconditional. And therefore, even if the child rebels and goes against the wishes of their parents and does not live up to the values of their parents, the parent, whilst on one level may feel a sense of disappointment, but in no way does that dilute or hamper the innate, essential, unconditional love that a parent has to the child. Because that love is purely for the fact that this is a child who is part of them and they are their child. Now, we see this specifically with regards to a young child. The younger the child, the more apparent that this is. Anyone who has had a newborn baby, when you have a newborn baby has done really nothing. Newborn baby has no achievements, right? They don't have their Harvard diploma yet. They don't have any qualities to boast of. They haven't got any accomplishments. They do nothing at that age. And on the contrary, they're completely dependent on us. And we have to take care of every one of their needs. And yet we love them incredibly deeply from the very moment that they are born. And indeed, even before they are born, there is a deep innate love that the parent has to the child. When it comes to older children, we have certain levels of expectations and they have certain responsibilities, etc. And therefore, on some level, when they fail to live up to that or they disappoint us, then that can, to some degree, affect the love on the external level. But when it comes to a newborn child, the newborn child is just pure, absolute, unconditional love. So the idea that the Keruvim were depicted in this form of being like an adult and a child, like a parent and a child, brings out this very, very deep level of our relationship with Hashem. Hashem says, B'ni b'choyri Yisrael, the Jewish people are my firstborn child. We are likened to Hashem's child, and therefore, indeed, Hashem says that I have loved you. Ahavti eschem amar Hashem. Hashem says, I have always loved you. Ki na'ar Yisrael v'oy haveu. The Jewish people are like my young child, and I love them because Hashem loves us with the unconditional love of a parent to a child. And that is true of every single Jew, every neshama, irrespective of how they may live their lives, whether they seem to be living their lives in accordance with Hashem's wishes or not, but Hashem has this essential deep love of a parent to a child for every neshama nonetheless. With this, we can actually understand a very, very perplexing Gemara. It's a continuation of the Gemara we discussed before in Masechta Yuma. And it says as follows: the great sage Reish Lakish taught, the time when the non-Jews came into the Beis Hamikdash to destroy it. This is referring presumably to the first Beis Hamikdash. They saw the Keruvim, they saw the cherub angels of the Aron embracing one another. And they took it out into the public space and they said, look at what the Jewish people are involved in. Now, just quickly on the side, this cannot be referring to the Keruvim on top of the Aron itself, because we know that the Aron was hidden before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore it would not have fallen into the hands of the enemy. Rather, the Gemara tells us that these were other decorative Keruvim which were on the walls of the Beis Hamikdash itself. But nonetheless, the same idea exists over here, that the Keruvim were embracing one another, and they said, look what the Jewish people were involved with in matters of immorality and immodesty. Look at the images that they create. So the question which all of the commentaries ask is that this is very bizarre, because if we think about the destruction of the temple, the Jewish people had sinned, and in the times of the first temple, they had sinned with the most horrific, horrendous averos of gilui arayos, forbidden relationships, shvichus damim, murder, and avodah zarah, turning their back on Hashem himself and embracing idolatry. And therefore, they had to be punished. They were being sent into exile. The temple was being destroyed. And based on the Gemara in Bava Basra, which says when the Jewish people were not doing the will of Hashem, they turned away from one another. They were not facing one another. We would have expected that at the time of the destruction of the temple, at that time, the Keruvim would be facing away from each other and not facing towards one another, let alone actually embracing. And here we come to a very, very powerful idea. That what Hashem is saying to the Jewish people is as follows: that yes, you have upset me. Yes, you have sinned against me. Yes, you've turned your backs towards me and embraced idolatry. And for that, I have to punish you. For that, I have to send you into exile. For that, I have to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. That Hashem says all of that is only on one level. It's only on the external level of our relationship. But deep down on the essential level, I have an eternal love for you no matter what. That yes, on the external level, I have to send you away, and there will be a destruction of the temple, but you should know Hashem's parting message to the Jewish people is that the Keruvim embraced one another, to always remember that I love you deeply and passionately like the love of a husband and a wife, and deeply and essentially and unconditionally like a parent to a child, which is a very powerful idea to appreciate, that even though we are in Galus now, even though we are still in exile, to know that Hashem says, Ahavti eschem. Not only I've loved you in the past, but I love you now, and I love you unconditionally like the love of a parent to a child. And perhaps the message for us is that if that is how Hashem loves each one of us, absolutely unconditionally, with a deep love, no matter what's going on the external level, that is how we have to approach every single Jew, that we have to love them unconditionally as well. That no matter what may be on the outside, we might see Jews who do not live up to the expectation the Torah has of Jews. We may see people who bother us, who upset us, who annoy us, who we dislike for one reason or the other. However, just as Hashem loves us and embraces us unconditionally, we should be loving and embracing every single Jew unconditionally as well. And with that, we rectify the sin that brought about the destruction of the second temple, which was sinas chinam, baseless hatred from one Jew to the other. And if we rectify that through senseless and baseless love, unconditional love for every single Jew, we will rectify the sin that brought about the destruction of the temple, and then we'll be brought back to Yerushalayim with the third Beis Hamikdash, where we'll have the Keruvim, the Aron, together with its Keruvim reinstated to their position, and we'll be able to see in a manifest, tangible way, see how precious we are in the eyes of Hashem.